And the future of parking, Miami Parking Authority is leading the charge nationwide by adopting new trends that are modernizing and simplifying the way we park. Please join me in welcoming Vice President of Business Operations for Pay by Phone, Saskia Ipema, Head of Enterprise Accounts for Smarking, Cassius Jones, Chief Operations Officer at Wise Moving Technologies, Roamy Valera, and Chief Executive Officer at Miami Parking Authority, Art Noriega.
Somebody lost something there.
Oh, there we go. Thank you.
No, I'm gonna sing it. Good morning, everyone. Oh, come on, we can do better than that. Good morning, everyone. Still morning, right?
Yeah.
So, most of you are sitting up here going parking. Wow, not very sexy. But one of the beauties of parking and one of the beauties of the industry that we're in is that it is something that impacts almost everyone on a daily basis in some way, shape, or form, in some capacity. It's also an industry that's experienced almost unprecedented growth in the last 10 years. There's been a lot of innovation in parking, and as an organization, Miami Parking Authority has been at the forefront of that. We've been a best practices organization, we've been an innovator, a leader, and by all standards and by all the measures that you can sort of put together that evaluates that, we are considered an organizational leader really for almost all of North America. A lot of people don't have that perspective about us as an organization. We operate in a city that has grown tremendously. We try to fly under the radar for the most part, but as an industry leader, as a technology leader, and as an organization, we've embedded in our culture this need to be at the forefront of what is a changing industry, the parking industry, both from a municipal standpoint and even from a private sector standpoint. But none of that happens without great partners. Every single one of the individuals sitting here and be part of this discussion are integral to that innovation and change, that evolutionary stage that we go through as an organization, and that transformational stage that we go through as a city. So I'm going to give a brief introduction of all three of our partners, and at that point we'll give them a chance to sort of speak to what they do, how they've impacted us, how they have impacted our industry a little bit. And then we'll do a little bit of Q&A afterwards. This panel was put together as an opportunity for a lot of you to sort of see what we do as an organization, but to allow them to showcase what they do for us, and in part what they do individually within their organizations. And you get a sense of the impact once they sort of get a chance to expand on that. First question. I got a show of hands. How many people here have a pay-by-phone app? Have the pay-by-phone app, first of all. We'll get beyond that. That's a good group. All right, I like that. That's about as big a number as I thought. So the first woman I'm going to introduce you to is our pay-by-phone partner, Saskia Ipema. Did I get that right? Close enough?
Good.
Okay.
Yep.
We've been sort of had a lot of variations of her last name in the last couple of days in the discussion. But Pay by Phone is our oldest partner of the three here. They've been a partner of ours. Really, we were an early adopter of Pay by Phone back when it was a dial-up service, and you had to literally get your phone and dial into a 1-800 number to start the transaction. And then that evolved obviously into an application, and right now, for us, has been probably a critical partner for us in terms of just allowing us to change the way we do business. She's the Vice President of Business Operations at Pay by Phone. She's responsible for leading the Project Management Office, building out the company's sales operations, and is the Acting Commercial Director for Pay by Phone's UK division. In her executive role, Saskia drives technological advances in order to develop scalable models to accommodate the growth of the business. Our next partner is Cassius Jones. He's Head of Enterprise Accounts with Smarking. Cassius is the Head of Enterprise Accounts It's a business intelligent platform, Smarking is. It's focused on solving the parking problem by digitizing the world's parking inventory. And as an early employee, Cassius helped Smarking really attain its first clients and develop its client base from the ground up. Our third partner is Roamy Valera, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Wise Moving Technologies Corporation, which is a partner of Smart Parking. Now, Roamy and I have a much longer history because Roamy and I actually go back, at this point, probably about 22 years. We worked together, early part of my tenure in the industry. So he is beyond a partner. He is a very close friend of mine, somebody that we sort of have grown up in the industry together. And he's been an integral part of a lot of what we've done through history, almost just on a consult basis. But one of the unique things in terms of statutory, in terms of his stature and his status in our industry is he's now currently the board chair of the International Parking Institute, as well as being obviously Chief Operating Officer at Wise Moving. He's a senior level executive. He's been involved in parking, transportation, and the mobility sector. So he has a background and a tenured spin over 28 years, 11 years as a public administrator. That's the introduction. So first I want to open it up to Saskia, kind of give a little bit of a background and presentation on Pay by Phone and your role there.
Thank you, Art. It's a pleasure to be here representing Pay by Phone, which is one of the Volkswagen Financial Services group of companies, specifically the mobility division. Volkswagen is investing heavily in mobility going forward. So what is the future of parking? Well, from our perspective, the future is that there is no parking. Certainly not in the way that we are experiencing parking today. So why is that? Well, technology is going to be utilized more and more. In the year 2020, Volkswagen's three brands, Volkswagen, Audi, and Porsche, will be rolling out autonomous parking. We have autonomous vehicles now. The next stage had to be autonomous parking, and that's coming out in 2020. So let's fast forward beyond 2020. Let's look at 2040. And what we see is a future that's very, very different from what we have now. So right now, everyone owns a car. Well, maybe you have a car service. And maybe with that car service, you get in, the car picks you up in the morning. There's no car parked in front of your house. You come into the car, you have a meeting, you have email, you have everything that you need to do. Or maybe you wish to have a nap in your car on your way to work. The car will drop you off and it will go away. Maybe the car parks, or perhaps you are a part of a service. And with that service, you have certain abilities to integrate with your car all of your mobile and smart devices so that the car knows exactly where you need to be, will come and pick you up, drop you off, go and get somebody else, bring you home at the end of the day. So what we see is that parking is going to change, and parking needs to change. Currently, our vehicles are parked 95% of the time. That's not very efficient, it's not very effective, and with autonomous vehicles, we have the ability to change that. So Volkswagen is looking to increase their mobility division. They are going to be adding smart technology to all of their cars, and that's coming out very soon. And Volkswagen is expanding dramatically. And the Americas are actually a really big part of those expansion plans. So there's lots of change coming. And what we want to be at Pay by Phone is the provider of choice. So currently you have a choice with regards to your music. You can use Spotify, you can use iTunes. There are many providers. And we want to be that equivalent as it pertains to parking. Your parking app will be part of your car will be a hub, and it will connect all of your devices together. So as we continue to evolve in the future, we need to worry about technology right now, and that technology, the gap between where we are now and where we want to be in the future, involves things like predictive parking. Where do I need to go? What are the chances of me being able to park there? And can the system tell me where the best chances are of finding parking? And all of those other aspects. Can it look at the personalization of parking? So perhaps in some countries, diesel vehicles are charged more to park than non-diesel vehicles. In some countries, you get a break on your parking due to the fact that you're a commercial vehicle, or maybe you're a doctor and you make house calls. I don't know if they still even do that here anymore, but in some countries they do. So with all of those different predictive services, you can integrate all of that into the car and into your mobile app, which then becomes part of your car, integrates into your payments, which automatically gets uploaded, all of your banking information, and the whole seamless hub is recognized and acknowledged as part of the car. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Saskia. Appreciate it. Cassius, you want to tell us a little bit about Smarking and more particularly your role there?
Sure thing. So my name is Cassius Jones. I'm the head of enterprise accounts at Smarking. We're a business intelligence platform that helps owners and managers of parking assets get organized around their data and make better operational decisions. So the Miami Parking Authority was an early client of ours, so thanks so much for working with us and inviting us here to talk. Today I'm going to share a little bit about how we think parking is going to evolve given the onset of autonomous vehicles. It's our view that parking is a critical piece of transportation infrastructure, very much like roads and bridges. But with the onset of autonomous vehicles, parking as we know it is set to change in a major way. Today we're going to talk about the importance of parking in urban environments as it relates to autonomous vehicle or AV deployment. Well, why is parking important today? Let's start there. We got to think about parking in terms of access. Personally owned vehicles are far and away the most common way to get from A to B. And once you get from origin A to your destination point B, you need a place to store your car. But AVs change this logic, right? The human is no longer the driver. So once you get to destination point B, you no longer need to store your car there, which reduces the demand for parking at destination point B. We think that this is an incredible opportunity for real estate owners and cities to repurpose unnecessary parking into higher and better uses. We're thinking housing, retail, parks, office space. In many places, this trend is well underway. So the city of Santa Monica is a client of ours, and in March they voted to repurpose a 300-space surface lot into a soccer field. The Smarking data showed that there was plenty of availability nearby to service the existing parking demand and any new parking demand generated by the soccer field. It's our view that over the next 20 years, most surface lots and on-street parking in urban cores are going to be repurposed into some other use. But just because demand for parking is expected to diminish in certain locations doesn't mean that parking is not important or that certain types of parking demand might actually grow. This might strike some of you as being contrary to the story I painted above, but understanding the forces that shape parking demand is a little bit more complex than observing trends in personal car ownership. Now, why is this? In the future of autonomous vehicles, we expect parking to play a big part in serving an even bigger problem: traffic and congestion. While high rates of personal car ownership absolutely contribute to congestion, it's not the determining factor. Vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, is the best indicator of traffic and congestion. In both San Francisco and Miami, the number of households electing to live car-free is growing at faster than the number of households more broadly. But in both of these markets, congestion and VMT have increased. Now, this has to do with changes in mobility patterns, namely Uber and Lyft. Uber and Lyft function a lot like a shared fleet, but they've got human drivers, at least for now. But we can use the travel patterns associated with Uber and Lyft as a proxy for how VMT might be generated by shared fleets of autonomous vehicles. Unlike the trip from A to B that I mentioned under the personal car ownership scenario, a trip from a shared fleet has two legs. After the passenger hails the car must get from its current destination, let's call that point Z, to its pickup point A, and then on to destination B. So unlike that trip from A to B, which just has one leg, a trip from a shared fleet has two, Z to A, and then A to B. A study by a PhD student at the University of Denver found that by measuring over 2,000 trips on both Uber and Lyft, that it took roughly 1.6 miles to bring a passenger 1 mile, or a 60% increase in VMT. What's more is that the demand for travel is not evenly distributed throughout the day. It peaks in the mornings and in the evenings associated with commute hours. Where are all these shared AVs expected to go during the afternoon lull and at night when demand for travel is negligible? If they simply circle around our urban environments looking for passengers, the increases in VMT and the associated congestion could be astronomical. And more VMT is not just bad for congestion. all of the emissions and all of the traffic fatalities associated with automobile use occur when the car is in motion. If VMT rises as we expect it to do, logic implies that emissions and traffic fatalities will rise as well. Now, this is where parking comes in and why it's so important. While I maintain that today's parking supply is overbuilt and that demand for parking might shrink, it's impossible to overstate the need to provide parking for shared fleets of AVs, as the alternative will be endlessly circulating vehicles causing more congestion, more emissions, and more traffic fatalities than we experience today, which are already at unacceptable levels. In a lot of ways, a parked car is more healthy for a city than a moving car, especially if that moving car is just empty and looking for passengers. It's our view that off-street parking facilities that are centrally located will be critical infrastructure assets of the future, enabling cities to function efficiently, minimizing VMT, emissions, and traffic fatalities. Off-street parking inventory will be digitized. This is what we're doing for the Miami Parking Authority. And inactive AVs will be able to digitally communicate with off-street parking supply in order to determine real-time parking prices and availability, and make optimal routing decisions given the projected demand for travel. To summarize quickly, while AVs are likely to diminish parking demand over time, they cannot be deployed successfully in cities unless they can efficiently navigate to available parking when not in use. Investing in parking technology like the Miami Parking Authority has done will be a necessary step for cities looking to capture the positives of AVs while mitigating VMT and all of the associated negative externalities.
Cassius, thank you very much. Mr. Valera.
Well, our goal here is to help and the parking authority identify and manage the curb space. In 2015, the Smart City competition by the Department of Transportation identified that there is a significant rush to manage the curb space, and that is the public right-of-way. So what we're trying to do is really create visibility to what happens on the curb space. Think of what's happening now in San Francisco, where a company by the name of Cord, which is a Sidewalk Lab or an Alphabet company, is literally identifying and managing all and every single inch of curb space that's happening in San Francisco. What they're trying to do is identify how the curb behaves and be able to manage all the demands that exist on the curb space. So what we know is that 30% of the majority of the traffic congestion occurs when vehicles start to circle looking for a parking spot. How many of you continue to go around the block waiting for that parking spot that is literally in front of the business you're trying to promote? So what we're trying to do with technology is basically manage the visibility of the curb space. Imagine that you're going from here to Coconut Grove and you can pull up an app and say, hey, if I'm going to go park in Coconut Grove, I'd rather stay away from Grand Avenue, but go to Commodore Plaza, because that's where most of the available parking spaces are going to be open when you get there. So the intent is to manage that, the curb space. The top 25 cities generate about $3 billion in parking related revenues, whether it's parking citations or whether it's parking fees. So there's a significant importance given to how the curb space is going to be managed. Ride Hail is competing for the curb space. Merchants are competing for the curb space as it relates to loading and unloading of their goods and services. Pedestrians are competing for the curb space as well. So we're seeing bikes, we're seeing transit, et cetera, competing for the curb space. So the goal and the importance of what happens at our government level, and particularly with the Miami Parking Authority, is to see how that the curb space behaves. What happens between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. and how do we better manage the needs of those who are going to utilize that space during those particular times. In the end, we talk about that dynamic, elasticity of price for parking, but in this case, what we're trying to do is really use the curb space of the public right-of-way to become itself dynamic. So a public parking space that today can be a parking meter, later in the afternoon could be a loading zone, and later at night could be a residential parking space. So we're trying to identify all these different demands, and as a result of that demand, be able to provide the service that it's needed for a public right-of-way that is, in many cases, one of the most important real estate assets that's left in government. So it's extremely, extremely important. When we think about technology and what technology is trying to do for the end user, is we're thinking of the customer journey as an integrated series of physical and digital interactions. So visibility will change consumer behavior. If you see where you're going, if you see what you're trying to do, and you see what you're trying to purchase and acquire, then you change the behavior of how you go about your ability to acquire those services. So that is the goal. We're trying to deploy all these different technologies. We're trying to mine all this data so we as a city become much smarter in the decisions we make, and the policies we adopt, and the procedures we elect to enact in order to manage a very finite piece of real estate, which is the curb or the right of way. So that is the goal and the objective in the partnership with the Miami Parking Authority.
Thanks, Roamy. So you get a sense really probably much broader and a much deeper dive than I think most in the general public have relative to how essential these partners are to us, and in particular what they're going to provide for us as a value added in terms of the future. Saskia, I have a kind of a two-part question because the VW finance role as far as pay by phone and the ownership of pay by phone is relatively recent, right? So we were an early adopter of pay by phone and an early partner to pay by phone, and as I mentioned in the introduction, the technology has changed so profoundly that I'm curious to see your perspective in terms of the value add to us, right, as a client, and then also how that transitions to our early sort of concept behind pay by phone for me in particular was a regional application, something that could be used by multiple cities. That way you had one platform that can be used by, we have a lot of obviously smaller cities in a county. It was an opportunity for us to sort of create a regional payment platform. That's now obviously expanded to more of a global brand for pay by phone. So talk about those two things for me real quick.
Okay, so with regards to VW, they're very keen to be a mobile provider, right? So financial services is a completely separate and distinct business unit from VW, okay? So VW Financial Services has invested heavily in a number of companies, including pay by phone, with the view that from within the car, within your we're calling it the hub, but your car becomes the hub, and it has your phone completely synced. It has all of the apps that you might currently have on your phone will be also in the car. You can use the car, and obviously VW is a large car manufacturer. In fact, they are the largest car manufacturer in the world with a great many brands, and they're going to take one application and share it amongst all of the brands. So whether you have an Audi, whether you have a Porsche, or perhaps even a Lamborghini, Bentley, or a good old VW, you will be able to use those applications, right? The idea is that you can then take from the car onto your phone. You can use it to see the same interface everywhere you go. So you're not trying to memorize a whole bunch of different apps and figure out, oh, on this one I have to do that. It's one app that you can use everywhere. The Parking Authority has done a phenomenal job of promoting the use of digital applications, and in particular, as it pertains to us, obviously, parking. There's a cost to having hardware, and by reducing that cost, then there's a savings as well, right? And some folks believe in white labeling, and it should be a Miami parking application, but the challenge with that is that obviously you have cities surrounding, you have people that are coming in and driving and parking within the various districts. So if everybody had their own parking application, imagine on your phone how many parking apps you would have, let alone other apps that you have on your phone. So it makes sense to have one app that everybody can use, and not only here, but you could drive to another state and use that same app everywhere you go. It's linked to your financials, it's linked to your credit card very securely, and that information stays secure and allows you to then transport and go anywhere you want and use that app to do the same thing that you would do right at home.
Awesome.
Did that answer your question?
It did, perfectly. Is anybody from Miami Beach here? Ah, Miami Beach people. So Miami Beach is the hole in the donut for that regional application, and the hope is that eventually we'll, through a little strong arming and a little pressure, convince them that they should come over to the dark side and join us in terms of that regional approach, because I think it's I think it has a tremendous value added to the customer, to the end user, and I'm certainly working on it. So we'll see if I can convince the beach to come join us in that endeavor. Cassius, give me a sense in terms of the analytics with regards to Uber, Lyft. How are they impacting parking demand? You touched on it a little bit in your presentation, but expand on that a little bit, because that's a question I get asked a lot.
Yeah.
And you're the guy with all the data, so.
Sure. So
Share it.
I think it's a great question, Art, and it's certainly very timely. I think the best piece of data that we have on this is we work with a portfolio of garages in Austin, Texas, and Austin's a really interesting example simply because Uber and Lyft were operating, i.e. the demand and for those services had kind of built up, and then I don't know if you guys remember, there was the controversy over fingerprinting. The city of Austin said that the drivers needed to be fingerprinted before operating, and they actually ceased operating in the city for around 8 months or so. Eventually, in June of 2016, the Texas state legislature introduced legislation that basically overrode the fingerprint mandate that had existed at the city of Austin. So from June of 2016, when the law was passed, to July of 2017, basically all this demand for Uber and Lyft was there, and then it just, the floodgates opened. And across the 6 garages that we have analytics on in Austin, Texas, we saw parking demand dropped to the tune of 20%, which is on average. Interestingly enough, it was only transient parking demand, so that had dropped. All of the monthly parkers, we saw no shift in behavior. So that's kind of an interesting data point on the various types of consumers, who's attracted to Uber and Lyft and then who's not. But in certain locations, Art, it can be up to like 55%. There's a garage that's next to a nightclub in West Hollywood. We were seeing, steep drops in parking demand associated with, evening parking, which in a lot of ways is a good thing because these are folks who might be driving under the influence had it not been for these TNCs. So different assets are impacted in different ways.
Another quick question, and it's something that I'm having a lot more discussion, especially internally and obviously also with some of the development partners here, and I see Nitin out there in the audience. And from a developer's perspective, this is starting to enter into the conversation a great deal in terms of the future,
right.
The asset itself, how to repurpose it, and what to do from a planning and design standpoint to sort of really engage that process. And so we've sort of hit a demarcation line for us as an organization that's going to be a standard process for us going forward.
Right.
How do I take a new project or an existing project and figure out what's the highest and best use is going to be at the time we start to see that demand cycle start to sort of change.
Yeah.
So give me a sense of how that process sort of start for organizations, for developers, for municipal operators and all.
Totally. So I think for parking professionals, one of the most exciting things that we can do going forward is really have this conversation around land use and what's the appropriate amount of space to allocate to parking and what's not. So I think for a city, first things first, across the US we have minimum parking requirements, which is a minimum number of parking spaces that must be built for a specific project. It's our view that there is plenty of existing parking supply and that we can better manage that supply, in which case new projects like some of your development partners would be able to take advantage of the existing inventory instead of having to build new inventory. In a lot of places, the cost of building a parking space is something like $30,000. I know it's $55,000 for an underground garage. And so if we can eliminate that minimum parking requirement, the developers can build more residential units, more housing. In Santa Monica, they did the soccer field, which I thought was fantastic. And I know in a lot of places we've got affordable housing issues. And so, parking can be a key solution provider actually in a lot of these adjacent industries.
So let's segue now to that on-street spot. And when you and I got into the business, it was a completely different animal in terms of how we even took advantage of that space. It was very sort of singular-minded, weren't a lot of variables to it. Now we've introduced them, especially in the last couple of years, beyond the ride-sharing programs, but in addition to that, the issue of deliveries. And now you have the Amazons of the world. So the delivery business has become food delivery is another issue that's become sort of prominent. So talk a little bit about how what you guys are doing in your technology will help us as an organization better manage that?
So think that in the United States, 28% of all transit users have the ability to view, their transit options. So they have visibility to, how they, what kind of transit mode of transit they're going to use. So the goal is to really have 100% visibility to, to all the right-of-way in the curb space. So rather than have, to be limited to, to a very singular view of I'm going to go use a parking meter or that is a loading zone, that is a taxi zone. We're literally going to try to turn, the curb space into something that's completely dynamic and allow the user to view 100% of the time, their destination and pre-procure if they want to. So it's a huge difference from historically how we've used the curb space.
So the challenge to everybody else here, and I'll wrap this up because we're about out of time, is that, from an industry's perspective, from a technology perspective, the way we see the world, every single one of the perspectives up here is going to change dramatically in 5 years in ways we can't even predict at this point. And in 10 years, it's going to be a unrecognizable change in terms of how we do business as a parking operation, but also how as customers, as e-commerce vendors, as consultants, all of you are going to see the world. So it's important that we really keep our ear to the ground as changes occur and as technology sort of becomes that disruptor. So I guarantee if we come back and do this panel, even in probably 3 or 4 years, the topics and the conversation might be entirely different. A lot of what we may be predicting now will be totally different. So thanks everybody for coming.